One of the essay questions I often set for music students is, discuss why the violin has not changed much over time. This is actually a trick question because, in fact, it has, but many of the changes are not obvious unless you know what you're looking for. With other changes, new designs only caught on for a short time or in a particular kind of music, but players soon went back to their more traditional instrument. Let's look at some examples from the collection to show you what I mean. This violin was made in around 1720, which is 160 years after this shape became standardized by violin makers working in Cremona in Italy. This example is unusual as it is still in its Baroque form. Most violins have been modified to project more sound as, over time, people have played music in ever larger spaces. This violin still has its slightly shorter neck that is not angled as far back, as well as strings made from animal gut rather than metal. This is the kind of violin that composers like Bach and Handel would have known. These same composers would also recognize this tiny violin known as a pochette or kit. The French name pochette refers to the fact that they are small enough to fit into the pocket of a long coat. This made them easily transportable, so they were ideal for someone who moved from house to house during the course of their work. In fact, they were used by dancing masters who went to the homes of the wealthy to teach people the steps of the most popular dancers of the day. Some kind of musical accompaniment would have been desirable, but the dancing master would not want to split their fee with a musician, so being able to play a tune themselves was financially useful. These instruments have very tiny bodies, so there's not much in the way of air or body resonance, which means the sound is quite shrill, not something you'd want to listen to in a concert, but perfect to cut through the sound of heavy feet on a wooden floor. Violin makers and scientists have experimented with different shapes and designs of violins over the years. Francois Chanel was born in 1788 in France, and he made this instrument in around 1820. As you can see, it has the same basic outline as a guitar. Chanel had learned to make violins with his father, Joseph, but his main career was as a naval engineer. He came up with this design of violin while he was off work due to an injury. It is a carefully thought-out redesign that was recognized as such by the scientific world at the time, and there's nothing wrong with its sound. The backwards-facing scroll even made it easier to fit the strings onto the pegs. But the design didn't catch on. Another scientist who was interested in instruments is Augustus Stroll. He was an electrical engineer who was involved in sound recording technologies. Stroll developed his violin design around the year 1900, and it uses some of the same concepts as early recording devices. The strings are played like a standard violin, and the vibrations pass through the bridge and into a flexible circular membrane. The vibrations then travel out through the horn and into the air for us to hear. These instruments were very useful in the early recording studios, as it's much easier to capture the vibrations coming out of the horn, which can be directed into the horn of a recording device, compared with the vibrations from a standard violin, which spread out very quickly. To start with, players found they couldn't hear what they were playing, so the smaller side horn was added and can be pointed towards the player's ear. Following their initial success, these instruments mostly fell out of use when electric microphones were developed in the 1920s, but you can still sometimes hear them in jazz and folk groups. So, to answer my essay question, the violin has changed, but most violinists still prefer to use instruments based on the design developed in Italy some 500 years ago.